Right, we're going to start for our afternoon session, and I hope you've had a really enjoyable lunch and done lots of networking. I think what one of these events really shows is all the different disciplines that there are when it comes to digital. I mean, there's just so many, it's so diverse and so vast, and you can't be an expert in everything. You can try, but you can't. And what we're going to have this afternoon is a real show of even more expertise. So Ric is going to talk to us now about Amazon Web Services Amplifi console. So, without much ado, here we go.
Thanks very much. Hello everybody. I hope you've not had too many carbs and are going to fall asleep during this talk. I'm going to blame it on the carbs if you do fall asleep anyway. So I'm going to talk to you today about how you can host websites incredibly cheaply and incredibly easy. Now, I'm going to try and do a live demo and actually publish a website while we're sat here. What could possibly go wrong with that? So I've prayed to the demo gods, I've sacrificed sacrificial things, and let's get going, so let's go. So I'm going to talk first of all about hosting at scale. Now, I have a background in working with media companies, the BBC and Channel 4, and when I talk about hosting at scale, I mean big scale. I'm talking about websites that used to go from 30k a second background traffic to 3 gig a second background traffic in 3 seconds. So that kind of scale, global media scale. And if you're going to build this yourself, it's very hard. But you can take advantage of a lot of the AWS features and our global network. It's all 100 gig interconnects. Most sites have multiple interconnects going in. And when I say multiple, we're talking a few hundred connections going in. And it's a global network. We also have these things called points of presence. And these are edge locations that aren't full data centers, but they're caches for your website. So it moves those images, those videos, that CSS or those JavaScript closer to your users to give them a faster experience on the website. And that just makes happy customers. So there's lots of those floating about. Now, before I show you the Amplifi console, I'm going to show you that you can actually do this on your own. You can do it DIY style. And what you do, you use a static web page generator. You create your code and you push it into S3 storage. S3's simple storage service, hence S3, and it's an object store. It's not a proper file system, you just put lots of files in there and it's got high concurrency of getting those files back out. And then when you couple it together with a couple of our other products, CloudFront, which is the CDN that takes advantage of those points of presence, those POPs, you can serve those objects as a website very, very quickly to a lot of users. And right on the top, I've got Route 53, which is our DNS service. You don't have to use Route 53. You don't have to use CloudFront. You could use Fastly, for example, and push that into S3. But S3 is incredibly cheap. Per gigabyte, it's less than a cent for storage a month. So 1 cent a month per gigabyte. That's really, really cheap storage. Now, there's other products we've got. We've got something called the Certificate Manager, or ACM. And you can have free SSL certificates and link that up with CloudFront. And then you've got a secure website, go in really easy. But the complexity of doing it yourself is when you want to do automatic deployments from Git. It is possible, and you can do it. And I wrote a little blog post on how to do this. It's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of code in there and a lot of little bits and pieces to put in, but it is possible. Now, the next thing I want to do before I do my demo is to show you how to do this easily. We have something called the Amplifi console, and it's a bit of a product that's the most undersold product we actually have. And it links in with your favorite Git provider, GitLab or Bitbucket or GitHub. Notice I said GitLab first. I'm a Linux user, and after the whole Microsoft buyout of GitHub, I got a little upset. If you follow me on Twitter, you'd have seen that. And then basically all you do is push your code to there, link it in with the Amplifi console, and it's deployed. You don't have to think about S3. You don't have to think about the CI/CD pipeline and building the machines that's going to do the static page generation. You don't even think about SSL. It'll do it all for you. Configure it, and really, really quickly. So if we have a look at some of the benefits of Amplifi Console, it's globally available. It takes advantage of all our points of presence and all our regions, so your data's replicated. There's features in there to let you do different branch deploys, so you can have a testing branch. On that, you can password protect parts of the site and make sure that if it's a testing page, that only members of staff can get in and have a look. And it's also got features in there to take you beyond static website hosting. It links in with things like Lambda and DynamoDB, which is a database, a NoSQL database. And you can use another part of Amplifi called the Amplifi framework to run one command in the terminal, and it'll create a database for you. It'll even create a GraphQL endpoint if you want to put multiple data sources together. And you can link it into static website hosting. So you can have a very fast website, but you can have back-end stuff if you want to. I'm not going to do back-end stuff today. I'm not brave enough to do that demo. But this, like I've said, we can deploy straight from version control. And this is pretty cool because then you can have a distributed team. You've got history of your code. You can roll back easily. And I can't understate how important it is to have version control on your code. We're going to use GitLab today to do the demo, and we're going to do a static website using the Hugo generator. Now, I don't know if you've seen these before. So we've got Gatsby over here, Jekyll in the middle, and Hugo. These three are supported automatically. There are more. But what happens is once you connect your version control repo to the console, we automatically detect that you're running one of these, and we know what to do with it. So we build all that, generating the pages and pushing it to S3 for you. And Hugo is my favourite. I love Hugo. It's just awesome. You go in there, you can write in Markdown, you can download themes and change it around and run a command, and it works. And I'm actually going to show you testing locally with it as well. So we're going to have a look at that. Here we go, demo time. Fingers crossed. Right, so first of all, I'm going to jump over to a rather bland looking screen, my terminal. And in here, I've already got my files down. I'm cheating a little bit. I'm not going to write a web page from scratch because that would be insane to try and do in 30 minutes. But let's go in there. In here, I've got a set of files, the main one being our config. And this tells us how the website's going to work. It's also got information in that's going to be rendered and generated into my web page. Now, the nice thing about Hugo is, if I can find my mouse, you can run it locally as a server. It's a Go binary, so there's nothing ready to install other than Hugo itself. If you're on a Mac, you can run brew install Hugo if you've got brew installed. Really simple way to get it done. And what this does is creates us a local copy of our web page, if I can spell local right, and we have a web page up and running. Now, the watch command is quite interesting because I can go in here and tweak a few things. I could go in and, for example, I'm just swapping roles. So I was a technical evangelist before. I'm now going into the architecture team. So if I find the tagline here, I can now remove technical evangelist from the site. And once I save that, the Hugo actually detects there's been a change to one of the files, regenerates it, and it actually refreshes the browser. So over here now it just says Linux Engineer and Solutions Architect over on this section here. So it regenerates it. I can test it locally. I can test it very quickly. Now the beauty of this comes to the Amplifi console. Now what I'm going to do here, and show you I'm not cheating, there's nothing configured, no applications yet. I'm going to go over onto this side, deploy. Now this is the bit that lets you build static websites very easily. You can extend it with the bit on the other side, which works with things like React, React Native, and you can build and deploy apps for mobile, static websites, progressive web apps, all of that. You can use a framework for that, and we've got loads of components built in, so you don't have to build it yourself. So if we hit get started on here, and this is the bit that normally breaks, I'm going to say GitLab, and I'm going to click next and hope it authenticates. It's looking good so far. And then I'm going to go down, I'm going to pick my, my repository. Now, just for a quick view here, I've got a repository called S3 Demo Site. This is where my code is stored. And I'll show you a redeploy in a moment as well. So I go back to the console, and I go down and find my S3 Demo Site. Now, I'm not going to do anything fancy with branches. I'm just going to use my, my master branch. And I'm going to hit next. And then going to hit save and deploy. And it's going to go off and start building stuff for me. Now, when I first deploy it, it's going to be broken. The CSS isn't going to work. But I need a URL that I'm going to capture and push back in. And you'll see how it just updates itself magically for you. So as you can see in this top corner, we're creating an app. Hopefully it won't take too long. It's normally about 2 minutes to do a full deploy. So while we're doing that, I'm going to drop back to my slides and just quickly tell you about the pricing. Now, I had a title on this that said hosting for pennies. And I want to show you a bit of an example. So there's going to be a lot of text in this next slide. I do apologise. But this is an example of hosting with Amplifi console. And we're going to say we have 100 daily active users, and we're going to deploy a couple of times a month, and the average web page size for mine is 0.3 meg, 300k. Once that's cached and people have visited it, it obviously reduces a little bit as well. So if I was going to do that, the costing after the deployments and working out storage costs and page views comes out at 73 cents per month, which is super cheap. And just to bring that home, yes, I wanted to put an animation in my slides. That is 73 cents a month for hosting. And if you think about then timesing that by 1,000 users, it doesn't change that much. It's not expensive to host this way. And there's another benefit you get to hosting from places like S3. You'll tend to start using a lot more client-side JavaScript applications. And when I talk about hosting at scale, I like to mention this. There's more compute power with your users than you're ever going to have in a data center or even. We've done a verify. Now, verify is a cool little option, and it gives us this little screenshot of what our website looks like. And at the moment, it doesn't look like my local example. But that's purely because I haven't put in this URL here. And some of my rather basic CSS and skills of making websites, I've not put in a relative path. So I'm going to go back to my config here and I'm going to fix that up. And we're going to go in here. If anybody wonders why I'm not using Visual Studio Code, it's because I use Vim, I'm old, and I'm too old to learn new things. Right, so I'm going to save that file. I'll put in my new URL of my CDN. I'm not using an easy URL because that takes a little bit of time to set up with Route 53, and I've only got 30 minutes to do all this. So custom SSL certs, we've got to verify my domain, etc. I want to do this from scratch. So now I'm going to do a git commit. I'm going to say update URL. I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to push this back to GitLab. And once this goes, we've pushed my changes to GitLab, which if we have a look in the browser, should reflect in a moment, and we should see we've just published something just now. Make that a bit bigger. So that's my update URL just gone in. And what this will do, already Amplifi console has noticed that there's been a change. And it says, I'm going to build a new version of this from the master branch. So it's been looking for a webhook, basically, coming from GitLab. GitLab's told Amplifi, hey, there's a new version, go build it. And that's exactly what it's doing now. You can see on here, the build process, and we can actually click on this and dig a little bit deeper, and we can actually watch a console this go through if we really wanted to, and we can see what's happening on the other side. And this will then push it out, deploy it, clean our CDN out of cache, and when we hit refresh on the page, it should look like my local copy. Fingers crossed. I know one more thing I need to do. I need to put my URL because I'm using that font or something on my site. So I'm going to go on here, add a new domain. Oh, there you go. Don't need that HTTP stuff as it says. Add that in. And we've done a verify now. So this will eventually give us a little screenshot here in the corner. And as you can see, the verify is given this. Now, if you're doing a mobile app with React, it will actually generate you images from different devices as well. And we should actually be able to dig into this verify section and have a look at some screenshots, which is pretty cool. He says. There's my website. So my website's now loaded. Within 5 minutes, we've gone from my machine, set up a brand new distribution, and deployed it to a global scale infrastructure. Pretty simple. Now, if we dive back in here, on the verify process, if we can have a look at this, we can see how it looks on different devices. So we've got this thing called AWS Device Farm. Normally, if you're going to use that as a standalone product, you've got to do the integration with it. Amplifi Console just does it for you. And you can see that this is how the site's going to render on all the different machines. So it's pretty cool, pretty powerful, and really, really fast. And it's not going to cost you a fortune to host. That's the best bit of it. If you want to put up a site, a page holder for a site, or if you want to put up a simple advert type website, this is the way to do it. But what if you want to do extra things? What if you want to capture people's email addresses to push them into a database, so you've got a mailing list? Well, you could use a third party like MailChimp or someone like that. Or if you wanted to do it yourself, you can use AWS Lambda, which is an environment, a serverless environment for executing code on demand. And you can have there that when someone hits submit on your form, this thing fires up in the background, takes that data, stores it to a database. And you simply get charged for the execution time of that. Whereas if you're going to run a server, you're paying for that server to run 24/7. So the cost is significantly cheaper when you pay per execution and just pay for the time you're running. And one of the cool things about that is that if you think about scale, now Lambda will do 5,000 transactions per second by default for every user. And if you pay your bill on time for 3 months in a row, we'll actually treble the amount of throughput you can do automatically for free. So you can do 15,000 transactions per second and just pay for the execution time. Now, if we're going to think about the infrastructure you'd have to build for that, if you was going to do it yourself, that's huge. That's a fair few servers you're going to put on there. And if you're doing server-side processing and writing to a database, you've got to think about the scale of your database and wait times. It gets complicated. It gets ugly fast. So this is a really good way to do it. So I'm going to quickly show you the Amplifi console, some points about the Amplifi framework, sorry. It's a set of libraries and a tool that you run from the command line. Yet again, you can brew install Amplifi-framework, I think it is, if you're on a Mac. And from there, you can set up and you can just deploy something really, really quickly. If you want a database, you define it in a JSON file and say, I want a MySQL database or I want a DynamoDB database, and it deploys. In fact, there's loads of components to it. You can even have a service worker. So if you're deploying an application for a progressive web app, it will deploy a service worker that goes onto the device of whoever's looking, that will hold in the background and look for updates, if that's what you're doing with it, or storage. There's lots and lots of different bits and pieces to it. It's really quite simple. I had to do a workshop on it about 6 months ago, and I'd never used it the night before. Had to stand in for illness, and I learnt it pretty quick, and I'm not a developer, so definitely it's the thing to do. There's also some good examples on the URL here, and I'll share these slides after. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll put out a link to SlideShare. There's a really cool real-time chat, but there's also authentication examples, and there's a to-do app on there, and examples using GraphQL as well. So that's the end of my really quick demo. I'm on time, Dean, so you don't have to get that hook to pull me off stage. So has anyone got any questions? No? Stunned silent. Oh, there's a question here. Yes.
15,000 requests a second.
Yeah.
What sort of environment is that running under? Is that just it receives a request and then it sends a response like hello world?
It depends what you're doing. So Lambda's an execution environment that's run in AWS, and in order to do the 15,000 transactions a second, we built an actual a layer on top of KVM in Linux, which is called Firecracker. It's an open source project, and this basically spins up an execution environment, runs your code, returns an answer, normally in a JSON object. You can specify other things. Now, the way that's handled in the background is because we've got huge scale. We have warm pools of Firecracker executors. We just attach your code very quickly to do that. The most I've ever seen it hammered is about 2,500 a second, to be perfectly honest. And that was us trying to break things. So it's a very fast environment, and you can actually specify how much memory you want. Now, the thing to remember about a Lambda function is it can only run for 15 minutes maximum, because it's a fire and forget kind of process. It supports multiple languages, Node.js, Go, Python, and there's also now a bring your own runtime. So if you like Ruby, you can bring Ruby. You can bring Cobol, if you like Cobol. There's some of the older people in the room on the front row here will remember that. And C++, you can bring your own languages to this runtime now. But it's very, very efficient, very, very quick. So, yeah. Yeah.
With Lambda, are you able to execute that with anything other than HTTP?
It will come in, most people put on API gateway in front of it, which is HTTP. The call comes through. There is work in the pipeline to support full like JSON-P profiles and that, but still over HTTP. You can invoke it from the command line or from an SDK. So if you've got an app locally and you want to run an Electron or something like that, you want to run a function in the cloud, you can call an API straight away. There are a couple of other execution methods. So if somebody uploads an image to S3 or a file to S3, S3 detects its hit and finished uploading and will trigger a Lambda function. So if you're doing something like thumbnail generation.
Same with SQS?
Yes, SQS is now supported.
Okay.
It wasn't before, but it is now.
Is there any way we can get maybe a $20 ticket to...
I'll do better for you. I'll give you two $25 ones to everybody here. So we're going to send an email out later. We're going to give you some $25 credits. I'm going to send 2 out to every attendee here. Now, if you think back to that example of hosting costs, that means if you had a website similar, you'd be able to host it for 5 years, 4 months, or something like that for free. So that's a good go. There's another question here.
I was going to kind of ask that. I've got a WordPress site. Would Amplifi be good for that? And roughly how much would that cost for one?
Amplifi won't run your WordPress because it's not a static site. But you can use other bits and pieces such as Docker and ECS or Fargate to host WordPress in. So yeah, but you can use those credits for that as well.
And how much roughly would that cost a month?
It depends. Well, in comparison, pretty low traffic. If you took one of the basic Docker containers, you look and run it in Fargate. Fargate's free to run. It's just the running of the container. So you're looking around about $30 a month to run a container, because it's running 24/7, even when idle. The beauty thing about Lambda and Amplifi console is, when nobody's looking at your website, you're not paying for it. Whereas traditional servers, you're paying for it 24/7 because it's using power, it's using electricity. Anyone else?
I think time's up now.
Good. I'm glad Pete kept quiet as well. Thanks very much.